So thank you very much, everyone, for coming and the opportunity to make this a reality. It is really a passion project, and I think something that will trickle down through the whole hospital system. So while I've got a captive audience, I'd like to make the elevator pitch and present to you some of the concepts of how we think this space could run, and I'll take you through the journey of how it got made and the context in which it'll be operating. So I'm a critical care subspecialist and a transplant surgeon here at Groote in the University of Cape Town, and I'm the lead on the Transplant Centre of Excellence project. And I'm a firm believer in the benefits of deceased donation for grieving families, in that it gives them solace down the road, in knowing that their tragedy was turned into something positive for someone else. But that's a difficult path to navigate in that acute grieving setting. And it's also a benefit for all the recipients of the organs and tissues. So this is what we're here to open today. It's been a journey to create it, but it's looking really good. And it is part of a vision to improve our end-of-life care offering, a better environment to have discussions with family, and to support staff delivering that service. And that's a multidisciplinary team: ICU, theatre, ED, trauma unit, palliative care, donor coordinators. And we want it to function as a focal point for quality improvement and a hub for education and training. I do have to mention Dr. Patel. It was her last day today, and she's gracefully left early. But really, her support for transplantation has been immense. It's a struggle to maintain, let alone grow the service in the public sector. And it's so key to the identity of Groote. And it's done on the backs of Herculean efforts by often single individuals. And we really need to try and capacitate our service. And the Transplant Centre of Excellence is a project to help drive that in terms of cost recovery and reinvestment. So thank you to her for that vision. And hopefully we do manage to continue that and grow it going forward. Now, I said I'd give you some context and where we're coming from. And if you look at deceased donation in terms of WHO and the statistics submitted to them, South Africa gets 1.6 donors per million population. Spain's the best country in the world. They get 47 donors per million. Remember, each donor is potentially 7 organ transplants. Okay. UK, big difference between Spain and UK, 22.5 donors per million. Brazil, our level economy, gets 16.3 donors per million. Okay. The Americans have an OPO system and they managed to get to 44 donors per million. So we're really underperforming and can do better. And we always see these pictures of, successful heart transplant. We don't put the picture of the donor in the newspaper anymore, okay? There's privacy concerns there, but there is a tragedy behind each successful donation. And ultimately, it was that man who made it happen. He gave informed consent to the doctors, having watched his wife die in the same accident by the roadside. And that's what we need to navigate with families, because there's an individual humanity story going on for each one, and we need to help translate that. Now, I presented 1.6 donors per million, but actually the statistics are even worse if you look at what happened during COVID, okay? And we're down to 0.48 per million. Our population is going in the exact opposite direction. You need to keep adjusting your denominator. We go up by about 1 million people each year in our population. So we have to grow our service. And here you can see the difference between the donors, between the public sector and the private sector. And it's really important that we understand that we're operating with a social contract, okay? It's an implicit agreement among members of society to cooperate for social benefits for everyone. And donation really sits at the forefront of that, and we need to do it well. And we need to make sure that we offer care to everyone for all range of diseases. And here you can see there was no state lung transplant program, and it started. And now we can translate those donors in the public sector into lung transplants for recipients in the public sector. And it's really important that transplant exists in a transparent space where we can have accountability for what's going on. And we've got that for our renal allocation. We allocate 1 kidney to the top of the donor hospital's waiting list, okay, to make sure that they recoup some of the investment that goes into deceased donation activities. But that does limit us, because hospitals without transplant programs are not investing in end-of-life care. And we need to scale up our investment in end-of-life care to everyone who's ventilating patients, because they're all dealing with end-of-life difficult scenarios. And then we allocate the other kidney from a deceased donor to the top of a combined provincial and private provincial list, which is combined of public and private patients. Whoever's been waiting the longest, the best match, who's going to benefit the most number of life years from that donor. So Groote is the only public sector hospital, together with Red Cross Children's Hospital, offering heart, lung, and liver transplants, and we're the highest performing renal transplant service. Where do we fall in terms of end-of-life care? Alaric asked me for some stats to go with the press release for the launch. We have 2,600 deaths in this hospital each year. 422 are palliative care counseled inpatient deaths. We have 64 approaches for consent to donation, and last year we ended up with 8 consented organ donors, of whom 2 were tissue donors. We really have a really steep drop-off rate, and I think we can approach our end-of-life care better, hopefully using this centre as a focal point to do that. Who would give away their last ICU bed on a busy Friday night to a consented brain-dead patient? This is what we battle with, okay, in terms of resource allocation. But actually, for managing that donor in an ICU bed overnight and making sure you don't lose them from a corner of a busy trauma unit, you're going to gain multiple life years, okay? Adds up to 55 life years gained for a deceased donor. But 12 hours work in ICU, 18 hours work in ICU. Most of our ICU admissions are not giving us that return on investment. So we really need to prioritize brain dead donors as a reliable source of benefit to the healthcare system. But it goes one step before that, because we have difficulty managing the end-of-life care process before we have consent. The consented argument's very easy to make, but when we're battling to get consent, we're living in a gray area. So who would spend their time hanging a bag of IV fluid and start an adrenaline infusion when the blood pressure sags in a patient with a catastrophic brain injury on the ventilator in a busy trauma unit on a Friday, so as to let the family come in and be counseled, okay? And to keep donation as an option for that family. And we need to really create a culture and institution of being able to explore that fully with the family. It's a marker of our end-of-life care offering. And unfortunately, that's what the doctors try to do in this situation. They're not comfortable. And remember, there's a clinical context, okay? There are urgent listings for heart, lung, and liver somewhere else in the healthcare system, okay? So just because you wouldn't want that liver, you think it's not quite transplantable, there might be a mother at Red Cross willing to accept that, because with fulminant liver failure, she knows her child has 24 hours to go. So we really need to think of the other context in the healthcare system. But because that's remote to the treating clinician on a busy Friday night, it's a really difficult thing, but we need to create that loop in the feedback loop, because it really is, in terms of consent, linked to how we communicate and compassionately handle end-of-life care with the family. They will always have just lost someone. And I have to put into my slides, it's not about our legislation, it's about the quality of end-of-life care. We always say, well, you know, we need to change our legislation, opt in, opt out, and this will fix our problems. And we can do an organ donor registry and that will fix our problems. Spain put in presumed consent, okay, so you have to opt out, but no change in donation rate for 10 years. They only got better when they created a central coordinating authority, put transplant coordinators in each ICU, quality assurance systems, and created that culture of routine donation. They still approach every single family for consent, and they have an 18% refusal rate. They just do it better, okay? It's not the fault of our population not to realize the full potential of deceased organ donation. It's really a reflection on our healthcare system. Brazil changed their law to opt out, changed it back to opt in because the donation rate went down. It's really not about changing our legislation. It's about engaging with this part of the process. So our starting point has to be that there's no culture or religion that's against helping your fellow human beings, and we need to go from there. And when do you pick up the phone to call to get advice? Because we want to put this center right at the forefront of that part of the process. And it used to be certify brain death, then refer to the transplant team. And I'm going to tell you that's wrong, and it's too late. And this is part of a culture change that we're trying to do and drive, because doctors dodge donation. Okay, there's actually 7 people dodging there. And if you look, it's not just us who are battling with this. If you look at the UK, they do a potential donor audit, GCS 2T on a ventilator. 26% of times, the doctors don't certify brain death. 4% have a contraindication to donate. 7% they do certify, no contraindication, but they don't offer it to the family. 36% refusal rate, and 8% too unstable to get to theatre in time, because the body has a habit of following the brain very rapidly in a brain dead scenario. Okay, so we really need to pick up the phone earlier, clarify the potential for donation, and engage with these discussions a little bit earlier on in the process. And we've got research looking from our own context, okay, in terms of factors influencing deceased donor consent rates. So I asked you earlier who hangs the bag of fluid to keep the donor and donation as an option. looks like only 1 in 3 doctors. About 67% of times when our transplant coordinators come onto the scene, the body is needing immediate resuscitation with a liter of fluid just to maintain a blood pressure. We really need to share that responsibility of keeping donation as an option going forward. And then we've got to the point of the communication. And the same study showed that 43% of times, even though it's a brain dead patient, the family's not aware of the poor prognosis when we're expecting our transplant coordinators to come in and get a consent. The doctors really need to work on our communication and our handover and that part of the process. And this is what we really want to use the center to improve, because we need to share the accountability. Okay, it's an institutional responsibility, not an individual doctor on that day. We need to make it an accountability issue for the institution. So now you can see that the organ donor pathway is no longer just identify, refer, and you're finished. We want to share that responsibility down this pathway. Okay, I'm not expecting Prof. Semple to do the transplant, but I'm expecting him to help with us for a bit more of the journey. But this is where we're trying to change things and move things forward. And it's been really positive to engage around this with people. But it is a process, and we are getting there. Because one of these two will get the organs. And often it's left to a very junior doctor in the middle of a Friday night with inadequate guidance to decide. And they don't know, and we need to work on the education. If you look at the UK, they came up with recommendations, okay, and came up with action points on where we need to actually try and get better, okay, and to make it part of our routine as a standard of care. So what triggers would you use to discuss the potential for donation? In the UK, and we've tried to do it here, but it is leading to confusion and we need more education around it, okay? But patients with a catastrophic brain injury, GCS 4 or less, not explained by sedation. If we are not realistically discussing what the prognosis is here with the family, we are doing an injustice to the family, okay? And it's not at the point of, I've confirmed brain death, it's let's clarify the potential for donation. I'm going to do brain death testing. And you start the discussions earlier and you give the family time. It's not a one-off discussion. We need this to be a sequence of discussions, bringing the family slowly around. Okay. So it does link to education, and we've got an online course that we're using as a tool to standardize education around medical school undergraduate curriculums. And it's something that coordinators are able to enroll people in to do. And you get lots of CPD points if you want them. It's 25 and 5 ethics points. And we really want to use the hub to develop short courses along the lines of ATLS, ACLS, and what palliative care have done, because actually we need to engage on simulation level training, debriefing. Communication is not something you can really learn from a computer. I can give you the context, but I can't engage with you on upskilling on those things and constructively growing our service. And communication is a skill we can learn. And it's modeled in the UK, and they've got a course for an intensive care trainees, 2 days, covers the intricacies of death certification and some of the communication. And in Australia, they have 2 courses for trainees, basically breaking bad news, 2 days on how to do that well, handling conflict if the family doesn't agree. And these are courses that we would like to modify and port into our environment in the coming year. And then simulation is a big part of those, because that's the real way to engage. And we've done this at Red Cross Children's Hospital. You don't need a paid actor. It's all people will give you a visceral reaction if you put a scenario in front of them. Okay. And then you see people engage on a very meaningful level, and everyone can non-confrontationally discuss. There are many different ways to have those conversations, and we need to improve that. So hopefully we'll bring out of the bush with the education. It does come to creating a culture of donation. Okay, now I've focused on organ donation, and we've got brain death diagnosis. That's less than 1% of the way people die. And it is possible to donate after circulatory death in selected circumstances. It needs to involve a mechanical ventilator. Okay, so that means ED, trauma unit, or ICU. But this is just some stats from the USA. About half the time in ICU, we know that death is inevitable, and we're either planning to withdraw or not to escalate therapy, okay? We're never stopping care, but we've realized that we're actually prolonging suffering and not offering a dignified death in around half of cases, is what the US data is showing. The dead donor rule still applies. Please remember that. I don't want to ever remove an organ. They have to be clinically certified dead independently. The transplant team's not involved in the palliation decision, and not involved in the certification of death. That doesn't mean that we can't start talking and helping advise, okay, in terms of what are the options in that situation. And if you look at the UK data, they get 772 brain dead donors a year and 657 donors after circulatory death. We've had 13 in the last 10 years at Groote in terms of donors after circulatory death. It's something we can get better at. And there's benefits because it really is a process that improves the integration of organ donation request into end-of-life care. That's why one of the major partners for this space is palliative care. They've got an excellent network through the province. That is a model and their education model that we really want to synergize with our organ donation education. Because it's a conceptual shift. Donation currently exists as a trickle-down end result. Nice if it happens. We need to make it something we focus on as a marker of our end-of-life care. And I really feel that's an important point. Because if you start to use the triggers, donation really shines a spotlight on it. And we've got lots of high-end therapies in this hospital, okay? And they don't help millions of people, okay? But how can we make the economic argument to do them? Okay, if I look at our ECMO program, there's patients helped, but we've had 3 referrals from George Hospital because we've now got the system in place that we could retrieve on ECMO if we had to. And we're having very constructive engagements. And the last 3 referrals have got better with a very close input from the ICU team here. And suddenly other patients are benefiting, even though they didn't physically receive it, okay? And we've got technology, and you'll see when you walk through the bereavement center, the coordinators have set up an ex vivo device. We've got an ex vivo device for kidneys, where you can allow more people to be donors because you rehabilitate the kidney in that cooler box stage, okay? And it's possible to do that for lungs as well. So about creating a culture of donation, you'll see that the next biggest partnership and the success of this project is based on, and I'll give you my 2 scenarios that I open with the students. Okay, so here's a scenario: 55-year-old, gunshot wound head, brain dead, renal failure, inotropes going like the clappers, blood pressure 90/50, INRs 10, so the liver's not working, saturating at 85% on 100% oxygen. Donor, yes or no? That's my opening slide in most of my talks. And people go, no. But I didn't say organ donor. What about tissues? You can die from cancer and still donate your corneas, okay? It's something, if we're going to create a culture in the institution, we need to not forget about tissues and eyes. So eyes, less than 70 years old, recovered with 24 hours to 36 hours of the death, and we need dignity in the process. If we don't close the patient's eyes when they pass away, the corneas can't be recovered at the mortuary. They dry out, okay, and they're not quality. So we need to add dignity to the dying process, okay? Here's a scenario. Now I've made the patient too old to donate their corneas, okay? Hypertensive diabetic brought into the casualties at the front, pronounced dead on arrival. Donor, yes or no? Red Cross, burns, we need to think of other things. So tissues is a valid option, okay? So we really need to think about creating a culture where we're routinely engaging with this life at the end of life, okay? And here's some of the numbers for tissue donation, but the tissue donation field's advancing all the time. I don't know what these numbers are. I shouldn't assume that I know everything. I should pick up a phone and clarify it every single time. And that's what we need to teach our doctors to do. Then they don't have to memorize this, okay? We need to make sure that we pick up a phone each time. So you'll see that the big partnership is through Vitanova, a tissue bank funded by Bone SA, founded by Bone SA, and they're the sponsors that have made this bereavement center a reality. And they really bought into a vision that if we improve end-of-life care, we'll end up with more donors as a result. That's all. There's no quid pro quo numbers exchanging hands here. It's simply we do better end-of-life care. And with 2,600 deaths annually in this hospital, I really think that we can. So the Transplant Center of Excellence, just in terms of honoring the gift of life, is the tagline that we'd like to apply to this as it grows forward. It's driven lots of projects. So the amniotic membrane service plan is in effect now. We've got an organ donation policy that's being discussed on provincial levels as a basis to try and advance these discussions for all hospitals. And we're promoting the idea that we do need a provincial organ and tissue donation committee. And then the next question is, who's on that committee? And that's precisely the questions we want to have asked, like, how do we structure that? How do we help coordinate these services? Because people are in all sorts of institutions. We can't just think of one institution. The project's also driven cost recovery because I think the budget cuts are an existential threat for very expensive therapies. And we've presented this to try and allow us to improve our hospital recovery mechanisms. And the example we used in that presentation, 12-year-old heart transplant, Prof. McCulloch is in the audience. It wasn't 4 months, it was 9 months, okay? Waiting. Okay? And a 16-year-old lung transplant transferred across from Red Cross, repeated admissions, and you can't use a home oxygenator in load shedding. So they have to come in and be admitted for oxygen. Costs us a lot to keep people alive with end organ failure. And then renal transplant, it's a 5% annual mortality with 10 years waiting. I'm a blood group O. I'm going to be waiting. Universal giver, not the universal receiver. And we need to think about, with the budget cuts, transplant outcomes are really linked to volumes. So we really need to cohort the activity in terms of transplant, and having more donors in-house will improve that a lot in terms of our outcomes and allow us to build capacity. And when we were doing the presentation, we used renal failure as a very good example because all provinces are dialyzing patients. But if you look at the proportion, they're getting hemodialysis, the proportion who are living with transplants is too small. The most cost-effective way, the best quality of life, is with a transplant. So that's my elevator pitch. I forced you to listen to it. Now I'm going to race through the end bit because I'll just show you some of the fun stuff in terms of how the Family Counselling and Bereavement Centre was created. It's about 2 years from concept to today's reality, about 6 months of construction. This is what it looked like in terms of the old space, but there was a hard bench waiting space. There was a corridor leading somewhere, and then we tried to track down the keys to get in. There was a Clintex office. There was a door that you could open, and then you found trolleys, and then you found lots of things just stored. This is one of our counseling spaces currently, okay? In probably the fanciest ICU, the D22 ICU, that's the counseling space we have, okay? So we really needed to get the hospital plans. We proposed some proposals, and then we ended up with these plans with the evacuation routes and all the rules from occupational health and safety. And here you can see it going up in terms of it getting constructed. And this is what it looks like today. And hopefully we maintain it looking like this. And then just while I've got the audience, just in terms of how the space will run, that's in evolution. We're defining that, and we're going to evolve it going forward. We've got 2 years of funding from the Groote Hospital Trust, is channeling that funding. That's also coming from Bone SA, okay? But we're going to employ the person with us through the trust, okay? I think it's quite important that we see that that's independent. So now we're in charge of their job description. Mr. DeVos helped for the recruitment, and we really want to show that this person is going to make themselves indispensable in the process of end-of-life care. We're going to support them by palliative care staff and supported by the deceased donor coordinators. So the plan is for the person, and we had a very successful recruitment and interview process, and I think we've landed with the right person, but we need to sort out all the contracts still. But a lead on deceased donor audit and QA processes for the hospital. And the plan is for any death in ICU or theatre during the day, the social worker to be contacted by the treating team and facilitate follow-up with the family, follow-up with the police and forensics if needed, moving the body to the viewing room. Quite often the bodies are just left. We don't have a mortuary in this hospital. So to try and facilitate during the day that we're more efficient and do it in a more dignified way, and coordinating bereavement and support services. Any critically ill patient with palliative care involvement, coordinating and supporting those services, supporting the ED and trauma unit who are going to start knocking down walls themselves and run out of space so they can come up. And we're outside theatre because a death on table, we have no place to put a family nicely and discuss that. And that's always incredibly acute and incredibly traumatic. We want to support any complicated bereavement, and we want to run educational activities for end-of-life best practice training. And then we're going to support the GSH femoral head donation project. All those hips getting replaced, you can actually donate your femoral heads. And we also want to push corneal and tissue donation. We want to maintain a logbook for the space, and we want to focus on education as well. And we want to make sure that the person in the role and the space is adequately utilized and supported by all the other staff. And you're all in the room today, so really thankful for you to come. And then we're piloting other things. We've got donation physicians have been it's always been the transplant teams advising on end-of-life care, and it's always taken by a pinch of salt by the referring doctors. I think we need to empower donation support physicians to help. And that's a model that Canada's used, the UK has used as well to try and manage this change in end-of-life care processes to make it better. We want to run a deceased donor audit. This is Australian data just showing how many transplants result. You always have a drop-off, but you need to be measuring it to make sure we do better. And you need to have the right definitions, okay? So what's a possible donor, potential donor, eligible donor, actual donor, utilized donor? We just say use the term donor, but we have to be recording it adequately in order to QA our process. Transplant coordinators in this hospital, we have 3. 1 living donor coordinator and 2 functioning and combined living and deceased donor coordinator roles. We don't have a dedicated renal or liver recipient coordinator. We have 1 heart and lung recipient coordinator, and we need dedicated deceased donation focused time to advance our system. The deceased donor coordinators are key. We did a national strategic roadmap with the South African Transplantation Society and mapping out the resources here. And all the coordinators are filling multiple roles and are getting very stretched in terms of what they do. They are still doing these things. Consent from the family is best done by a trained requester. They manage the donor. They can't manage a donor until they're declared dead. So a donor after circulatory death requires the treating team to manage the palliative process. Okay, the coordinator can't take that over. We need consent from the forensic pathologist, medical manager. There's an awful lot of coordination. This is about 36 hours of work on your feet the whole time. And then they don't get paid overtime, so they have to claim that back, okay, in time off during the week, okay? That's the only mechanism we have to pay them back for that work. So a deceased donor is an ICU admission in our hospital. We can justify the use of those resources. So whenever possible, we don't want it to be managed in a corner, and we want to do that with the full support of the ICU team. Living donation is run out of an office on E13. It's close to the recipients in terms of bringing in family members and to the nephrologist assessing whether it's safe to run a patient on 1 kidney for the rest of their life. And there's a very experienced sister there who's still going to support the deceased donor coordinators, and that's still their hub of activity. But we really want to use this space to capacitate and expand the service and improve integration. It also offers us a venue for debriefing of staff. We've tried to do this after referrals to set up a counseling session with every single referral, successful or not, to quality control. There's always something we could discuss and try and improve, but let's not discuss it in the heat of the moment. Let's do it afterwards. And we want to use this space to routinely do that with teams so that we set up those loops to improve. And we want to integrate feedback into unit morbidity and mortality meetings. And we want to support staff with health and wellness. So it's a space for palliative care discussions. We want to improve the dignity of dying. It's the lead up to the request that we need to improve and empower, and hopefully this space will function that. And that's the way to better donation rates. Really don't think we should see every death as a failure of our system, and we really have an opportunity to make it into a positive reflection in terms of including it as an essential part of our end-of-life care that we actually provide routinely. Thank you, and I can't begin to say thank you to everyone who's made it. I'm going to forget names. You're all in the room, and I'm going to let Sandra and Mr. Mohammed go for that. But really, Bone SA, the power brokers there who bought into this vision, the board, I really appreciate that. Yaku from the side of designing and doing the contracting. And our project site manager donated his kidney yesterday to his brother. So he's not here, the man who did it. Yeah, so just thank you to everyone who's made this possible. I really, really appreciate it. And now it goes straight into the next speaker. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, David, Dr. De Vries, everyone else here, all our honored guests. It really is an awesome privilege for me to be here in 2 capacities today. So yes, I'm the president of SATIBA, really the South African Tissue Bank Association. We're a very small sector, but we formed an association in 2012 and we were formally incorporated in 2015. And since then, we've been hosting international conferences really to enable our transplant or our tissue banking community to grow. Our aim is really to support all the South African tissue and eye banks in regulatory and legal matters, data collection, training, accreditation, all of those things that make it difficult to run a tissue bank effectively. And our vision is really to unify and align and develop the sector through collaborations, exactly like what is happening here today. We'd like to collaborate more closely with government, so we do some lobbying work with them. We engage with partners, both private and public, and also international role players as we try to grow the tissue banking sector. And we really exist to promote global tissue banking standards. Tissue banking is really huge in other parts of the world. Thousands of people internationally rely on tissue donation every day throughout the world to restore sight, to restore mobility, to bring healing, to provide new life, quality of life. Literally, I think worldwide, we're talking about millions of people. We want to ensure that we get greater access to tissues and cells. Our membership is made up not only of tissue banks dealing with disease donation, but our membership includes organizations such as the Western Cape Blood Service, the South African National Blood Service, stem cell banks, even gametes, sperm donation, all of that. We also try to create and promote equity and fair utilization of cells and tissues, irrespective whether people can afford it or not. We're promoting fair and ethical tissue procurement and banking and distribution practices. And one of our cornerstones is the protection and respect of both donor and recipient. The donor coming out today quite strongly. So early on in the days at Satiba, we looked at our situation and said, what is our most critical challenge? And it is actually the lack of access to tissue for patients. There just isn't enough. So in our collaborative efforts over the last couple of years, we've done a lot to try and increase donor awareness, work more with other organizations. And up to 2023, we've spent more than 5 million rand collaboratively to try and improve the situation. We've done lots of work with the Organ Donor Foundation. We work very closely with the organ transplant sector as well as the South African Transplant Society, which is something that we had to work very hard at getting to that point. And then we identified some critical projects, both in Western Cape and in KZN, to work on specific projects that could enhance and grow tissue donation. Here in the Western Cape, I'm going to share with you one project that is outstandingly successful. It really blew us all away. We never expected that it will be that successful. And then another one in KZN where a lot of time and effort and money was spent, unfortunately yielded very little success. I'm going to show you just one example, one tissue type that we have huge shortages of. If we talk about lack of tissue, what do we mean? So the numbers at the bottom is a little bit blurry, but you can see that corneal donation, and this is really utilization. It takes out all of those that QC failed or for some reason couldn't be transplanted. But in 2002, cornea donation really peaked in our country with more than 1,150 local transplants. So here I'm only talking about local tissue donors and local corneas being transplanted. It is unfortunately true that thousands of corneas are being imported at the moment into South Africa because we seem completely unable to provide in the need of our own patients. So it's a drastic decline that we've seen over the last 20 years. It's a desperate situation, as you can see, and anyone will tell you, once a graph looks like this, you don't turn it around. But at Satiba, we said we cannot sleep at night if we have to admit and say that we cannot help South African patients, ordinary state patients, through corneal transplant. We have to be able to do that. We've got healthy people dying every day in South Africa, in Cape Town. We have to be able to make a difference. And why did we see this drastic decline? And there's many reasons. Some of them, unfortunately, yes, in the late 1990s, there were some unethical practices. There were some bad press at one time. There were IBanks that didn't operate properly as they should have. There were loopholes in legislation. There were improvements in legislation, which is a very good thing for our public, but unfortunately had a negative impact on corneal donor numbers. And so in the last couple of years, we've seen closures of IBanks. The Pretoria IBank closed in 2012. The Center for Tissue Engineering is trying to pick up the work there. Not very successful at the moment, but there is an effort happening. We saw the closure of the Port Elizabeth IBank in 2014. Cape Town IBank closed in 2020, where Vita Nova, the tissue bank, stood in that place and is now reviving corneal donation and actually doing quite well. And then we also lately saw the closure of the Johannesburg IBank, the Gauteng Corneal IBank, the biggest, strongest IBank in the country, closed in 2021. And that is due to one thing only, and that is a lack of donors. So if we just look at the last 10 years, that's what the graph looks like now. And I know it doesn't look very promising, but I am hopeful because for the first time in 4 years, the graph is starting to go up a little bit, just picking its nose up. And I hope that in time, we'll be able to fix that number. So there are some ongoing challenges, of course, on a high level. We unfortunately have a lack of national policy. We don't have a national policy on organ and tissue donation. We have insufficient legislation and also, unfortunately, a lack of formal support from government, something that we have to work at fixing. We do work very closely and we have a very supportive transplant center, but unfortunately, required death referral systems are lacking in both private and state hospitals at this point in time. And with the public, insufficient public awareness, still a problem. There's no one clear route to donation at this point. If anybody dies in any given hospital or forensic or on the road, wherever, there's multiple places that you can try and contact to donate. I still believe that having one clear route will help us ultimately to improve. And then, of course, some of our own traditions and cultures doesn't help the situation. But Satiba really is here today and just want to say and salute Bone SA and Groote Schuur Hospital for this remarkable collaboration where we are trying to put together everything that is needed to address this issue of lack of tissue. So moving on to the other part of my presentation, I've been working in tissue banking for the last 20 years and specifically in donor recovery. I was called earlier this morning, oh, you're the bone lady. Thank you. That's fine. So over many years, been working specifically with musculoskeletal donation in Pretoria and then more recently down here in Cape Town. So Vita Nova was established in 2020 by Bone SA. And can I just say that this is not the first and only tissue bank that Bone SA established. They started way back when, 30 years ago, and started the very first tissue bank, the National Tissue Bank in Pretoria. After that, the Center for Tissue Engineering, also in Pretoria, and now the Vita Nova Tissue Bank down here in Cape Town. And we've really had to work very hard. It happened all right in the middle of COVID, and we had to work at an accelerated pace to survive, really. And happy to say that due to collaborations like the one we have with Forensic Services, within 3 years, we were able to recover an average of 17 deceased donors every month, and that's musculoskeletal tissue donors. We're now distributing about 1,200 bone allografts every month. And this is a next step for us, this formal collaboration with the Groote Schuur Hospital. one that we cherish, and one that we hope will help us in as we develop our iBanking capability. We really want to set the tone. We want to become the leaders in iBanking yet again, turn that graph around. But to be able to do that, we need the community, the hospital community, to help support those efforts. I'm sharing with you just a few slides of our success that we've had with our collaboration with forensic services. And this didn't happen easily. The first time we started talking about this way back in 2017, it started very slowly, and it took us a whole 5 years to the point where we eventually signed formal agreement. And I'm glad for the forensic services colleagues who are here today. Thank you, Wayne and Kevin, everyone else that's here for coming. I'm not sure if Dr. Verster and Prof. Luna is here, but thank you to them. I'm just showing you some results. We're running a formal research project with them, but in just 19 months, we've obtained these results. And this is after scanning thousands of deceased people's details at both Tygerberg as well as the Observatory Forensic Pathology Institute. And we have identified in this time nearly 700 potential donor cases, of which 229 consented to donation. That gives us a conversion rate of 35%, which I think in the population that we see in forensic services is reasonably good. Of those, we procured 182 musculoskeletal donors. That's almost an 80% recovery rate. Some of them fall off due to some non-suitability issues. And then, very importantly, during this time, our coordinators shared information with another 1,000 families in those facilities, telling them and educating them about what is organ and tissue about. So right now, 62% of all the tissue donors that are recovered in the Western Cape comes directly from forensic services. And that needs a shout out, and that deserves a thank you. I want to quote Mrs. Funita Thompson. She said, "This is a community responsibility. We can't look at others to say, how are we going to fix the problem?" And any one of us at any time can be in the situation where we need that cornea, where we need skin after burns. Have you seen the fires going around? David himself was in a little bit of a threatening situation at his own home a week ago. When do we need it? We can't wait for it to come that close to home before we act. So I'm so grateful for her vision and insight in realizing that forensic services even has a responsibility and a role to play here. But the important thing that I see here is that the same community who donate through forensic services is the same community who come to Groote Schuur Hospital for their medical care. And that same community already has proven that they are willing to donate. And we just need to explore it a little bit further. So one of the lessons, we've learned some lessons. The question we asked is, how much prompting do people need to act, to start donating in the forensic services context? And we said that, yes, promotional items helps. It legitimizes the cause, it provides structure in the conversation. It's a nice thing to take home. It helps. But personal interaction with a knowledgeable, compassionate person of authority is absolutely key. And that's part of what we see will happen at the center through the social worker, through the work of the transplant coordinators. Their training and the way that they approach families is unique. They've been trained for it. They know how to do this, and it's vital in success. But for me, I think the most important lesson that we've learned this far is that people are willing to donate. Cape Townians of all colors and religious groups are willing to donate if only we give them the opportunity. And that is what this center must do. I'll share with you just a few slides in closing. At Vita Nova, we honor our donors. And I'm so grateful for the insight that the board has had when they established the Vita Nova Tissue Bank to put right in the center, right in the heart of our facility, a memorial wall where we remember the donors that die every month, yes, and give their tissue. And as a team, we gather once a month and we have a bit of a debrief and we talk through all the different donor cases. And it's a very special and unique thing for us because it is a really hard ask to ask people who's lost such a dear person to, at the most difficult time in their lives, make that decision to donate. But they do. And some of them come to visit the wall. I only could find these pictures last night, but there's several more that have come. And for some of them, this donor wall at Vita Nova is the only place where they have a memory of their loved one. There's no grave. There's no wall with ashes anywhere. The tissue bank is where they come to remember. At Father's Day, we have people there with their children. Birthdays, anniversary of the death. And we are so glad. It was never part of the plan, but we're so glad that this wall actually means something to the community. It's become something really precious and that we are very glad that we can share with them. Also, for your information, together with the Transplant Society, with the whole community, the transplant community, we have an organ donor tribute event every year. I'm just showing you here some pictures from the most recent one that was held in August last year to just demonstrate to you that when we do donation, the road doesn't stop with the death. It doesn't stop with the signing of the consent form. We try to walk a road to follow up, to help in that healing process. And we're totally convinced that people are supported. They find comfort in the fact that they could help someone else. So for that, we're very grateful. Lastly, on this part, this quote, very precious to us. It was one of the moms at Salt River Forensic said, "My son is in a better place now. Had he stayed longer, he would have caused more havoc. But now he can help someone else." Isn't it powerful? Isn't it precious? Lastly, on the Family Counselling Bereavement Center, I want to just say a couple of thank yous. And firstly, something like this has to start with a dream. And David is our dreamer, was the dreamer in the beginning. Forgive me, David, if that's not the right words you would like. But I think he dreamt a dream. He wanted to see something more happening with deceased donation at this hospital. And thank you for sharing that dream. That made it possible for us to collaborate with this hospital in this unique thing. And then, of course, the concept was approved by Dr. Bhavna Patel, making it something that could potentially happen. The concept was there. But it only became reality when the directors of Bone SA, Prof. Pietru, and the rest of you made the decision to fund the project. Thank you. And that moment, it became real, and we couldn't believe it, and we're saying, oh, heck, now the work starts. So thank you for that. Bricks and Mortar Jaco Neetling of MP Procon, thank you. We've given you lots of gray hairs, I'm sure, changing the design all the time, last minute changes all the time. But the way that you navigated this whole project has been amazing. Thank you for that. We appreciate you and all your patience and the professionalism with which you and all your different contractors have handled it. And of course, the support that we've received from Groote Engineering and Facilities, every electrician, every artisan, every plumber that's been involved in the project played an important role to get it done. And as David said, Andy, the project leader, project manager in ICU today, I phoned Jaco this morning. The surgery took place yesterday, and as far as we know, they're both in ICU and doing well at this point. We trust that Andy has literally saved his brother's life. But when this project started, none of us knew that this will happen for Andy. And I just think it's just such a true picture of what we want the center to do. Maybe we can claim Andy as our first success story. Going forward, we're going to need a lot of support still. Groote Hospital Trust, thank you. That will help channel some funding and the appointment of the social worker. Kirsty, thank you very much for your collaboration and help this far. Bone SA, who will be providing the funding for the next 2 years for that position. Helena, thank you for all your maths, sums, making money work. Thank you. We're going to keep on needing that. The Division of Critical Care, Ivan, it's been a pleasure working with you this far, and we look forward to how we're going to work together further, as well as Renee from Palliative Care. We're going to have to walk a road. And then Groote community as a whole. Every doctor, every nurse has a responsibility and a privilege to take part in this great effort. And we invite you to do so, to walk this road with us. It's not David's project. It's Groote. It's about the families. It's about the donors. And I hope that you will all be supporting that. Thank you very much.
Well, I think. Ahmad, thank you very much. We're delighted to be here. And I must say, I think there was a plan that David had from the beginning, actually, from the beginning. Sandra worked on half of the board, and Pat and David worked on half of the board, which was the executive. Let me explain. So we came here, we had tea, we did a walkabout, and later on he persuaded me to do the Death to Life course. Then we had coffee in observatory, then we played golf. At the golf, guess what we won? Each one of us won a 6-pack of Castle Light. So he had to leave because he had a patient in ICU who was not doing very well. But yes, it was a visionary project, and we are grateful that the Sandra and David's partnership worked. I thought I must just tell in brief who we are and what have we done to date. By the way, this year we celebrate 30 years, and I think we deserve a round of applause. And the chair and the colleagues in the board have been quite visionary in driving this vision of Bonus A from 1994 to date. Now, in brief, as Sandra mentioned, Bonus A was born out of a strong desire to contribute to humanity. And it's a spirit of Ubuntu. And that was then conceived in 94. The first tissue bank was set up at the University of Pretoria. The second one at the Tshwane University of Technology, operating a center for tissue engineering. And the groundbreaking moment happened in 2021 when the launch of Vitanova took place. Now, in brief, tissue banking in South Africa started way back in the 60s. And the objective, the emphasis was entirely on bone allograft. And this was done through a very rigorous quality control process with recoveries done from deceased donors. It grew over time because of close collaborations with organ donor organizations. That's why we took passion and interest in building this partnership. And currently we recover 300 donors per month. Interesting statistic, one donor in organ donation contributes 7 patients, can benefit 7 patients in tissue donation, plus minus 67 patients. Tissue recovered now includes musculoskeletal, dermis, the eye tissue, and the cardiovascular tissue. Now about tissue donation, who can donate between 15 years and 80 years? These patients or these donors must meet the set criteria. Who regulates the work that we do? We're regulated by the National Health Act 61 of 2003 under Chapter 8 regulations. And therefore the tissues, the products we process and produce are not devices, they're not implants, they are human tissue. The banks are regulated by the Regulation 182 of the National Health Act. Now, the consent process is obtained obviously posthumously because we work entirely with or predominantly with deceased donors from next of kin via the first contact is telephonic, and then this gets followed by a written consent witnessed by 2 competent witnesses. Our QMS, our quality management system, follows international best practice and is certified according to the ISO 9001 and 2015 standards. We expand through collaborations. Sandra has said this, I'm going to say it again. We have the following collaborations and we want to do more, because only when we build collaborations that the vision that we have, that we collectively have developed with Dave and Groote Hospital will grow. We have collaborations with Tshwane University of Technology, with South African Tissue Bank Association, with the Western Cape Forensic Pathology Services at Tigerberg and Groote and in Observatory. We have done sterling work with the iBank Foundation in Cape Town, and we're still doing work with the KZN iBank in Durban. We have done this work with Groote. We have coordinators coming to the hospital on a regular basis. And we have another program which is predominant in the private hospitals, the femoral head program. This is where we also ask the teams in various in various theaters who get involved in hip replacement that get in touch with our teams to see that if we cannot recover the femoral heads that have been discarded. We are able to repurpose the discarded femoral heads into alternative bone products. In conclusion, what is a way forward for us? We want to deepen this collaboration, which is why we have committed on a 2 years time frame to support it come off the ground. We want to improve the donation rates in eye tissue. We want to expand the femoral head program in the Western Cape. Hopefully we can grow it within the Groote Hospital. We want to expand collaborations with leading surgeons, because only when they transplant the products that we produce, that they can give us reviews, they can give us feedback, they can give us the prognosis outcomes of those patients that have received the transplant. And in the short to medium term, we want to expand collaborations into the African continent. We are currently working with the Namibian distributors. We are working with the Kenyan distributors. We are looking to expand beyond that to grow the work that we do. We do it because it's a call to action. We are not for profit. There are no shareholders. The board takes full responsibility for this work that we do. And we are directly answerable to the Department of Health in terms of compliance, in terms of patient safety, in terms of traceability, in terms of reporting adverse events. Thank you very much. And well done, Sandra and Dave. Welcome and well done to all of you. Thank you very much.
And just to Dr. De Vries, you have to get yourself a clicker so that you don't need to always stand behind the podium. So thank you very much. Palliative care is really a paradigm shift in this hospital. And I think what we're talking about really here is collaboration. And it's really a privilege for me to stand here with a community who has helped to develop palliative care in Groote Hospital and in the community. So thank you very much for everybody who's here, who has supported this development. So we know that palliative care needs to be integrated, and we've got the policies and the processes to help us do this. And this is supported by the World Health Assembly, that we really need to look after our patients who have palliative care needs and who are at the end of their lives, to provide better care for them and their families. So why is it so important for palliative care to be in this hospital? Firstly, we know there's a high need, and this number of deaths has been shown in Groote Hospital. But we also know that 50% of expected deaths should be actually receiving palliative care. We also know there's a high cost to end-of-life care if it's not properly managed. And we really want to aim to give the right care at the right time to patients and their families. Groote is also a teaching and learning center. And the students we encounter here on a daily basis, we really want to ensure that when they go out there, they have the skills to provide the palliative care. If people are in a situation where they are faced with suffering and they do not know how to manage it, it really leads to a lot of moral distress. And it is so important that we as a teaching institution really ensure that we provide them with the skills and show them that good end of life care can be done. This is also a center of excellence, Groote Schuur Hospital. And working tirelessly with many of the colleagues in this room, we have the opportunity to really ensure that the research is done to provide contextually relevant palliative care and to ensure we really influence policy across South Africa to ensure we are integrating palliative care. And it's really, I want to say, Prof. Werns walked out of here, and with David Thompson, really working towards everybody, ensuring that the work we're doing here is spreading. So what services do palliative care actually provide in Groote Schuur? And my team is sitting at the back there, and I think number one, we're a team. And we're not only just a team within ourselves, we are a team within the bigger hospital. And we have really great colleagues that we collaborate with on a daily basis to ensure palliative care is provided. So I'm not going to read through this, but very important, it's a comprehensive approach to ensure people understand what's happening to them, to ensure they have the pain and the symptom control, and to ensure there is continuity of care for these patients and their families. And then very important that there is a mechanism to follow up and just to see how the service is growing and the number of patients seen by the services. We also do a lot of training, and it's a wonderful opportunity where we are integrating training into different areas, whether it is training ICU specialists, undergrads, whether it's training registrars. But above all, it's that daily interaction that we have on the wards with the registrars, with the consultants, where we talk about the principles of palliative care with them. It's really wonderful. What we are also doing is we're showing that it is doable. Palliative care is doable in hospitals. And with the help of Dr. Arendse, we are developing palliative care in various other hospitals, showing that there's mentorship. And as Professor Thompson said, we are going to bring these new nurses to our service and showing them how that can be done and how we can integrate palliative care in ICUs, and hopefully then expose them to tissue donation and organ donation, and therefore spread the skills and the knowledge that is needed to ensure the patient and the families get the right care at the right time. One of our real skills, and my team is really strong at this, is looking after the family. Counseling families about the diagnosis and the prognosis, facilitating very complex conversation, talking about future care planning, and that's not only for the patient, but for those who are left behind as well. Educating how to look after themselves, how to look after the patient. And when we are with a patient in ICU, many times those family members will say, but what am I going to do now? What can I do? And giving them the skills, what difficult conversations to have when they are in this really emotional and vulnerable stage. And this is just a number of all the family meetings that we have on a monthly basis. So what is our way forward? I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I thought David was building a center for me and Prof. Semple to talk in. I was very excited that he was actually giving us a lounge to have our family meetings in. But this is much more than that. This is about showing close collaboration, showing that there's no end to caring, and above all, that we can train these skills and make sure everybody has access to this. Thank you very much.
So congratulations again, David, to you and your team. Congratulations to Groote Schuur for, I think, what is an incredible step forward as a quaternary facility in South Africa. And we're looking forward to the opportunities that the center offers us for that holistic care of patient within a family, within a society. So thank you very much.